Okay, so welcome everyone. My name is Francesca Iacorto and I'm an advisory board member of the Pearson Centre. I'm also the Senior Director of Public Affairs at the National Airlines Council of Canada. As many of you will know, the Pearson Centre is a progressive centrist think tank that addresses the big economic and social challenges of the day. In that context, I'm pleased to welcome you to the 9th webinar on major policy issues related to COVID-19 and how they are affecting our society. Today, we will talk about online citizen engagement, an old idea which is now the predominant idea for citizen engagement in this COVID era. While there have been some very powerful rallies and demonstrations in recent months, online engagement is the safest way to work together, communicate, and make voices heard. However, before we get into the subject matter, I'll just take a couple of moments to thank two sustaining sponsors without whose help these sessions would not be possible. First, we have Canada's Building Trades Unions, and second, we have the International Association of Firefighters. So big thank you to both organizations. Now back to the panel. We have two experts in online engagement with us today. We have Mark Blevis, who is a digital public affairs strategist who has trained many individuals and organizations on matters relating to digital and online communication. He is co-author of Touch: 5 Factors to Growing and Leading a Human Organization, which focuses on human connectedness in the digital era. Mark is also Director of Public Affairs and Marketing at Commissionaires Canada. And we also have with us today Stephen Staples, who is well known in non-government circles in Ottawa as the founder of the Rideau Institute on International Affairs, which is supported primarily by an online community of 25,000 people. Today, he assists organizations in online engagement and fundraising through his agency called Public Response. Concerned about the impact of COVID-19 on people who support nonprofit organizations, he trained over 700 people in the past few weeks on the basics of using Zoom to communicate and engage. The moderator of today's webinar will, of course, be Andrew Cardozo, who's the president of the Pearson Centre, and Andrew also writes a regular column for the Hill Times on public policy issues. With respect to the format, the panel discussion will last about 40 minutes and then be followed by a Q&A period with you, the audience, before we end promptly at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. Please use the question box on your screen and we will get to as many questions as we can. This session is being recorded and will be posted on the Pearson YouTube channel later on this afternoon. With that, I will ask Stephen Staples to get us started. So Stephen, the floor is yours. So please go ahead with your opening remarks.
Thanks, Francesca, and nice to see you, Mark and Andrew. Thank you so much for inviting me here today. I'm delighted to be here. The 9th one. I think I've seen many of the previous sessions, so it's great. It's great to join you. This is an exciting time for the development of online citizen engagement. Things are progressing so quickly right now. It's like nitro has been put into the gas tank and the thing is just flaming off. Even though I've been working in online engagement, well, my first email address I had in the 1980s, if you can believe that. But really, at the turn of the century, when we started building our online community, which eventually became a major supporter for the Rideau Institute. And I can't tell you how many hours I spent trying to negotiate my way through Facebook Live and trying to do webcasts and things, but the technology has just advanced so much. And this terrible, awful pandemic has compelled people to rush into this technology. So it's an important time to consider where we are and where we need to go. As I mentioned, I've been working in nonprofit organizations and continue to do so, not just my own, but many others, taking the lessons that we've learned over the years and helping them to apply to others. But I have not seen anything like we're in right now in terms of transforming the need for digital citizen engagement. I mean, it impacted everyone in ways that nobody could have predicted, of course. I mean, we all remember when. I mean, in early March, I was about to send out a fundraising letter in the mail, and I was planning on taking a group of students for an educational experience to a conference in New York when the state of emergency was declared in Ontario, and just everything was plowed aside. And so I think everybody has experience like that, and trying to the amount of time that was taken to rethink everything, all the activities that we had been doing in the nonprofit sector had to be recast into an online format in order to accommodate for all the absolutely necessary health protection measures. And it affected all what I would say the main 4 areas of nonprofit work. Governance was shifted, board meetings were all online, everything like that. Your programming was affected. How do you advocate? How do you do lobbying? How do you have meetings? How do you hold special events? All of that was changed. Development and fundraising was, especially groups that rely on special events to do fundraising. And of course, the terrible economic impacts of the pandemic were going to affect our fundraising. And now we're beginning to see what that might be shaping up to. And of course, staffing, because thousands and thousands of people are employed in working in nonprofit organizations. And how, just like everybody else, how is all this remote work going to affect the workplace? And many staff whose responsibility was community engagement now had to learn to do their jobs online. So looking at all of these things and saying, how does citizen engagement, how is it impacted by it? Well, in preparation of today, I did a little informal survey of of a number of organizations that I work with and supporters, and I had about over 100 responses, which I'll allude to some of the stories that we're hearing that are going in the sector. But the top line is that an amazing transformation is happening in all areas, and we are right in the midst of it now. We are right in the midst of it. Things were pretty messy the first few weeks, but now things are beginning to become more ingrained. And I can share a little bit about what people are saying out there as we get into our remarks.
Okay. Okay, so thank you very much for your remarks, Stephen. I'll now turn the floor over to you, Mark.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. It's nice to be back with the Pearson Center event. Very nice to meet you, Stephen. And I made lots of notes on what you had to say, because there's a couple things I want to build on that you brought up. What's really interesting about the time that we find ourselves in right now is it's almost like we've been in training for this pandemic era for the last few years. It doesn't necessarily mean that we were ready for it, but a lot of the things that we were doing, we're starting to work in that direction. For me, and we were talking about this before we opened up the webinar today, March 13th was kind of an interesting turning point in how you realize people are prepared or not prepared, and I think that's a big thing. When I was talking in particular about our daughter's university, I won't name it, which was forced to send students home on March 13th because that's when the province shut down. And it was only supposed to be for 2 weeks at the time. And our daughter noted that the courses in those final few weeks of that term were weak. They were kind of like they lacked structure. It just seemed disorganized and disarrayed. And assignments, there was all sorts of confusion over assignments and everything. And just everything that functioned normally the way it had up until and including the 13th suddenly took a pivot. And I think that's because the university, the faculty, the professors hadn't really prepared themselves for an online mindset. And what I think this pandemic has taught us is you have to be ready to switch on a dime. You don't necessarily need to be up and running right away, but switching from doing things the way you have been doing to the way things are now evolving takes time. It doesn't just happen overnight. We saw a lot of organizations that were slow to embrace Zoom or other online tools. You found that they weren't using them particularly effectively, and there was this giddy time of transition, which was fine, and we tolerated it. but now we don't tolerate it anymore. We're past the period of, I'll pick on Zoom. I think, Stephen, you brought it up in your points. I think we're past the point now where people will tolerate goofy backgrounds. I mean, backgrounds to block out what's behind you makes a lot of sense, and I've done that myself. But if you have craziness behind you and there's low contrast and low light and all that, then your background suddenly envelops your head. Sometimes there's this bookcase that's taking over your head. The other thing that's really important to consider in the pandemic era, and I'd like to lead into some points about engagement, but you have to remember something else, which is right now, we are all spending much more time with a piece of glass in front of our face than we did before, say, I'll pick on March 13th as a pivot date. You wake up in the morning, you're checking your phone. We always did that. You know, there used to be a commute to the office, so you'd be looking through a windshield or maybe walking on the sidewalk or sitting in a bus, and that would take you away from your computer. You might look at your phone a little bit or listen to a podcast. That's fine. Then you get to the office, there'd be talk by the coffee machine, there'd be talk in the boardroom. Then you go to your computer and work on your computer for a while. That doesn't happen now. Everything that I do with my day now is with this computer. So my coffee breaks are with the computer, and I'm engaging with people online. My meetings are on the computer, coordinating with my staff and doing my work. And then at the end of the day, meeting friends for a virtual beer or whatever. We're easily spending 2 or 3 times the amount of time in any given day with our computer, because after the virtual pub, you're probably also watching a Netflix show. So there's a recognition, and maybe I'm disrespecting this recognition right now, of being concise and crisp with people's time. Meetings that used to be an hour, maybe they should be 15 or 20 minutes now, so people can step away from their work and get some work done and not have to be engaging with other people and worrying about meetings dominating their day. So the big thing, I think, is the planning for the recast. We know that restrictions are being relaxed now. And so we will be going back to the office. As you can see, I'm already back in my own, having spent 90 days consecutive working from home. And Andrew knows me from many years ago. I always worked from home when I was running my own company. The difference is when I worked from home, I would meet Andrew for coffee at some point in the morning. I might go to a client site for a few hours in the afternoon. I might meet another client for a beer at 4 o'clock. So even though I was working from home, there was a variety in my day. And that variety doesn't really exist anymore. I put on a shirt and tie today, which was exciting. I'm wearing pants too, which is good. You know, I think that I was in a Zoom meeting actually with some colleagues from across the country, and I stood up to go shut the door. And when I stood up, I came back and I saw in the chat window, somebody said, are there polka dots on his pajama pants? They're actually guitars. You know, I'd forgotten that I was wearing my pajama bottoms because it was comfortable when you're at home, just stay in your pajama bottoms, even though I put on a shirt. So there's lots of little things that I think that are well beyond even the change in how we engage online. There's the social recognition of what you're doing and how you're doing it, how teaching a course online is very different from teaching it in a classroom, engaging with people online, and the amount of time that they're spending online outside of the 15 minutes you might spend with them, or the interactions you might have with them on Twitter or Facebook or wherever. I think that's probably a good part for me to stop so we can go to questions.
Oh, that's great. So thank you very much for your comments, Mark. I'll just now turn it over to Andrew. And he will ask you a few questions, both of you a few questions, and then he'll turn it over to the audience. So over to you, Andrew.
Thanks, Francesca.
Thank you, Francesca. Let me just start. I want to go through 6 very quick webinar etiquette points that I'm just going to outline. Things to think about when you're going on a webinar that's work related, different from all the fun, the family and friends type of webinars that you might do. So number 1, check out the technology in advance, make sure it works, especially if you're going to be using something like any documents. If you're sharing a screen, make sure all of that works ahead of time. One of the things you might also check is the clarity of your camera. So for some reason today, my camera is not very clear, it's rather blurred. And this appeared at the end, but that's the kind of thing you want to be checking ahead of time. Number 2, remember 2 things. 1, you're going to a meeting. And number two, you're going to be on camera. So think about how you want to be dressed for that. If it's an early morning meeting and you're just crawling out of bed, you still can't wear your pajamas unless you intend to. As Mark mentioned, sometimes you might have pajama bottoms, and you know, it depends on who you're meeting with. It might be fine, it might not. But think about the fact that you're going to a meeting. I think generally speaking, the decorum or the dress code is about 2 levels more informal than it was when we were meeting in person. But don't go too many more levels down from there. These days, if you happen to have a backdoor pool and you're going to do your webinar from beside your pool, you might not want to be in your swimsuit or a towel thrown around you. It may not look as professional as you want to do. So think about that and think about your appearance. Keep in mind that I'm not saying how you want to look. I'm not telling you how you should look, rather, but just be aware that you're on camera and people are expecting that you're at a meeting. Number 3, the webcam. The camera on your computer, as much as possible, try and have the eye of the camera in line with your eye. So that's the way it usually happens in a TV studio, for example. So I know it's called a laptop, but you don't want your laptop on your lap when you're doing a webinar. It doesn't look that good. The view you get is up your nostrils and stuff like that. It may not be quite the look you want to get across. So what I do is I pop a few books under my laptop when I'm doing a webinar so that I get the eye of the camera more or less in line with my eyes. Think about the background. Oftentimes, one of the things is issues of privacy. And indeed, we've been doing a number of webinars and we've had at least one case where somebody preferred not to be on camera for privacy reasons. So the fact is that a whole lot of people are going to be looking into your home, and we go ahead and then post that webinar on our YouTube. So forever, people are going to be looking into your home. So you want to be thinking about, and I hope I'm not freaking you out, but you want to be thinking about the fact that people are looking into your space, are looking into your home. And we're probably okay with people looking into our offices, but maybe not our homes. If you're working from a desktop computer, the chances are it's against one wall, which means you're looking at the room and the rest of the house. So there's more room that people are looking at. There is, as we were talking earlier, there is an app out there that rates people's backgrounds that can be fun. But it's interesting, after the House of Commons sat for the first time online virtually, there were lots of comments about people's backgrounds. One reporter, for example, took a screenshot of the Prime Minister's background, which was bookcases, and put out a call to people on Twitter, asking them to be able to name the books in the background. So people were trying to figure out what those books. There were still lots of funny comments of people saying, "Oh, that's Das Kapital by Karl Marx," and so forth. But you want to make sure that if people are going to be able to see those books, you want to, have a bit more Jean-Jacques Rousseau and less Harlequin romances, for example. The lighting, try and have the lighting that's coming from either the front or the sides as opposed to the back. You don't want to be backlit because then people won't be able to see your face. They'll just see your outline. And lastly, the sound level. Can
I share a trick really quickly, Andrew?
Sure, go ahead.
So I'll share a trick that I shared with Stephen earlier is, and it can be harsh if you overdo it, but if you have a computer with a brightness setting on your screen, whether it's an external screen or your computer itself, you can actually turn up the brightness and it lights you up. Like that's pretty harsh what I've done there, but you can see how it really pops me out of my background. So that's one trick. I have a light off to the side as well, but certainly don't underestimate the value of your screen as a light source to make sure that your foreground lit. Yeah,
good, thank you. And lastly, the point 6 I just say is sound level. So make sure you're in a quiet spot, and the best is to use headphones or earbuds, the kind of thing that Mark has, because that way you can hear everybody right. And if you've got a microphone, you're going to be heard better than the phone that the rest of us, for example, are relying on today. So that's the quick 6 points. Let me go to some questions. Let me start with you, Steve. You said you talked to a number of people to get their feedback on how their engagement is going. Can you share some of that with us, especially in terms of how people are engaging with others around issues that are important to them?
Absolutely, and those are great. Those are all excellent points. Things that I think everybody can improve upon. And what you're describing to me, Andrew, is the need for a new language. We're all learning a new language now, and we all need to be able to speak it in order to communicate with one another, and that is how to use this technology. And we are now, all our interactions are being mediated through this thing called Zoom or WebEx or whatever it wants. And I think that is definitely going to have an impact on the type of interaction that we had. And that was one of the things that was really worrying me when in early March, when the COVID hit, was that I work with lots of people that are engaged with community organizations. Many of them are seniors, but these are the people who sign the petitions, who write the checks, who come to the events. These are the engaged people, especially if you're doing advocacy work, that we rely on. And I just knew these people did not have the language and the skills in order to communicate. And we needed to find a new way of communicating with one another. So that's why I kind of started offering free. Everyone was doing free workshops. I thought, free webinar, how to use Zoom, free workshop. Well, people came by the droves. As I mentioned, in about 4 weeks, I trained over 700 people how to do it. I was doing 2 sessions a day, and the beginners, and then I added a more advanced one as my pedagogy got a little bit better in terms of training people. So while I would say to my peers, I said, hey, I'm doing these free Zoom workshops. And they say, doesn't everybody know that already? You know, and this was pre-COVID, because we have been using it for a while. And I said, not really, because when I just did an initial survey back then, and I found that 1/3 of people were comfortable. You know, another 1/3 had no idea, had hardly even used Skype. And there was a big chunk in the middle of people that had maybe gone on to a Zoom call or something in the past, but never said anything. They never participated. They didn't really know how to work their camera or their microphone. And so the level of engagement was shifting, I felt. And these people needed to be trained in order to engage in that. Now, in preparation for today, I sent a little note out a couple days ago, and I got over 100 responses, both from people that are staff that are involved in community engagement, that do the outreach themselves, and then about 2/3 of them are people that receive it. They're the supporters, these people that I mentioned, and many of the people I studied. The banner, as I mentioned, there's a huge transformation going on right now. Everything is being moved online. Everything is being rethought. But the good news is, there's no crisis that I can tell. I mean, you could imagine there was, could have been pandemonium when all these restrictions came in, especially for nonprofits. But the interesting thing is, there's no sense of crisis at this point. But whether we're being successful is in dispute. We have not decided whether we're being successful at community engagement, shifting it online. We're all trying to do it. As one person described to me, it was messy at first. Messy was the word, which I thought was a good way to describe it, as we all learn how to work these systems, and it's getting better. And there's success stories, and there's not success stories out there. So, I can talk a bit about the crisis zone. But some of the groups that I've been working with, for instance, Andrew, one organization I started working with, they managed to double their membership through online engagement during COVID. Now, they had to wait for the period that they could talk to other issues other than COVID, because the media only talked about COVID for weeks and weeks. But still, they were able to double their membership. So that was a good point. Other organizations, for instance, are finding that their reach has been magnified incredibly. One group that used to do a municipal event in downtown Toronto every summer is now recasting their event as an international event, and they're getting attention from all over because going online suddenly expands. But there are other warning signs. I am part of an organization that's had to go on work sharing because of declining revenue, which is not necessarily related to online, but there's a downside to it. Another organization is shuttering its office. in part because they now know they can work online fairly well, but also there's an economic impact to it. So it's early days in terms of what success looks like. Certainly, a vast majority of people say they're doing a lot more online engagement. When you talk to folks, 80%, 89% say they're doing way more engagement. When I ask people, you know, has it affected your ability to engage with the community since COVID? 79% said yes, it has definitely had an impact. But as I mentioned, where it's contested is whether it's being successful or not. And this is where people are unsure. So although most people feel generally it is being successful, but those people that are responsible for doing the outreach, the staff of organizations, they tend to be less sure of whether it's actually achieving the goals that they want. Now, that could be because it's difficult to evaluate. We're not really sure how to evaluate our success for online, for engagement and online engagement, or it's still early days. That's what we're hearing. I also ask people, how long do you think this is going to last in terms of where people's mindset were? Are these short-term changes just for a few months? Do you think this is only going to be maybe a year until they find a vaccine, or are some of these things permanent? Well, less than 1 in 5 said it was only going to be a few months. I think we can predict that. But the rest were evenly divided between some people saying, it's only going to be a year and we'll be back to normal. But the other half says, no, these changes are going to be permanent. So I thought that those were encouraging results, but still too early to tell.
Steve, and when you talk about the online engagement being the key way people are engaging, which platforms are you talking about? You mentioned Zoom a lot, so would that be Zoom and, say, emails?
I didn't ask specific platforms, but I also asked people to tell me their stories. So I received 100 stories from people about their success stories, actually, about overcoming a challenge with community engagement using online technology. And I'll post these on publicresponse.ca, some fascinating stories if you want to have a look. And it does give an interesting snapshot into what's happening in organizations. But overwhelmingly, Zoom comes up. It is the #1 platform that comes up, but not the only one. Other people are certainly saying they're relying on email. They're using collaborative platforms like Google Docs. Some people talk about co-editing things all at the same time, working in work groups online in the same document at the same time using that technology. Other collaborative platforms like Slack appeared once or twice, but by and large, people are learning the language of Zoom in order to communicate.
Okay, I have attended one of your workshops, and I did find it very instructive, and I thought it was equally interesting to listen to the Q&A part and the kinds of questions people were asking, because you were getting really a broad range of questions of people who had sort of medium to very little knowledge about Zoom, and were asking some very good basic questions. In terms of getting information out, you've helped us at the Pearson Center. Is MailChimp the best way of getting in terms of platforms? What are the best ways of getting information out to people, either to tell them about stuff or get them engaged, besides Zoom?
Well, that's a great question, because email marketing systems have improved a lot, and there's a lot of them, and each one has its own strength and weakness. I've used many different ones, MailChimp being just one of several, but certainly email is an essential feature now. You'd be surprised, Andrew, and Mark, you've probably seen this too, and Francesca, how many organizations actually don't have very big email lists. And some of these groups have been around a long time, and they had not built up that capacity. Mark, I think you were alluding to this, were you ready for it or had we been preparing for it? So some groups were more prepared than others. Certainly, I've been organizing online for a long time. I was inspired back by the old Move On campaign at the turn of the century in the US. And I was really inspired by that and started using techniques that. I also have a direct mail background, so I was able to transfer direct mail online. But email is absolutely still effective. And I'll tell you, there's different levels of engagement, right? So experts look at level of engagements. One is you can just be sort of informing people. Other times you can be wanting to consult them. Even more advanced is have them engage in making decisions with one another. So different technologies lend themselves to that kind of outcome that you want to have. Email has been great for communicating information broadly, and you get great metrics. You know whether people are reading it. Also, you can do what's called A/B split testing. You can test different messages, see which one works better. Of course, Facebook is a very mature platform now. It's very good. And one of the things is, if you want to go beyond just informing people, Andrew, and actually get them to do something, what you call a call to action. I love that. Call to action in your email, whether it be leave a comment or sign up for a webinar or click to send a petition. Some platforms are definitely better than others. Email rules the waves in terms of that, in terms of online fundraising, whatnot. Facebook, not too bad, pretty good, especially if you're spending money on advertising. Pennies a glass, as they used to say. It can be quite effective if you know how to do the targeting properly. But other platforms like Twitter and Instagram, not so good. If I was advising people how to spend advertising money, I would not suggest those platforms necessarily if you want to have a strong call to action. Email and Facebook are still really good.
Well, thank you, Mark. Let me get your read on the different platforms, the best ways of getting information out there or communicating two-way.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew. I want to pick up where Stephen left off, which was on the email side of things, and I'll tackle some other tools. Email is an incredibly powerful tool, and whether it's Constant Contact or MailChimp or whatever, these are all tools that if you're not using, you should be using. But you also need to pay attention to what other people are doing and learn from either their mistakes or successes. So I'm going to pick on two organizations by name, and then I'll talk more broadly about organizations. One is Good Life. When Good Life sends out emails, for some reason or another, the text is embedded in an image. So the whole email is structured around an image, which means when I look at it on my phone, which is where I do most of my email checking for personal reasons these days, I mean, my personal email, not for personal reasons. I have to constantly zoom in and move around, or I can click through to go to their webpage, which is another option. But if you're sending it to me in email, send it to me in a format in which I can read it. The Loblaws angle that I'll use is whether you like them or dislike them, Galen Cisco knows how to communicate, and his emails were always written as though it was a personal letter to the reader, rather than a corporate, official communication, which made it really easy to read and fun. And you almost felt like, oh, I got another letter from Galen. I got to check in on this. Of course, it was all good news at the very beginning, and lately, there's been some criticism of Loblaws and some of their changes they've made. The other thing more broadly, though, is you need to pay attention to the kind of email that's already arriving in your inbox. I'm subscribed to a bunch of mailing lists. I follow a number of companies, and as a result, I'm on their mailing lists. And there's a whole bunch of mailing lists I never knew how I got on, but I'm still getting them. And when the whole crisis broke out, and Stephen, I'm sure you experienced this as well, every single organizations I bought a pair of shoes from 10 years ago and I happened to be on their mail list, were sending me all sorts of information about what they're doing to respect you, their client, and their employees under the COVID restrictions. And I lost count how many of those emails I got. That's important information, but ask yourself, does your audience care? Are you sending it to the right people? And is this the right time to send the message? Because they're already getting flooded with this. So I saw a lot of blowback online when these emails first came out, because everybody's saying, how many of these emails am I going to get? I understand we're taking this seriously, that's great, but I don't need to know from 100 different places that they're all taking it seriously, especially the ones I haven't dealt with in a long time. So those are all important things. Look at the whole landscape, not just your little corner of the world. So you talked about call to action. That's great. Absolutely. If people are into your cause, if they're followers of your organization, Good Life or Loblaws or an advocacy organization, give your audience something to do. I caution against slacktivism because change your avatar for one day or whatever, because it's easy and it makes people feel like they've made a difference, and maybe in some small way they have, but that's not sustainable. That's a moment in time. If you want to create change, you can't just do something like snap a photo and expect the world to be a different place. There's a lot more involved in that. I've made notes on some of the things that I wanted to share in my 7-minute vision. I adapted it a bit, but one of the things that you want to do is you want to make sure you have a clear vision of what you're trying to achieve and crisp language to help reach your audience. There's a lot of going on right now, as you may already be aware, besides the pandemic, and cutting through the noise sometimes and getting the attention of your audience, even though they're already a committed audience, and getting them to do an action really requires you to reach them with a crisp message that they can understand, and that sells the point without a whole lot of extra research or understanding. So these are all things that whether it's Twitter or Facebook or an email or a video, you want to make sure that ultimately what you're doing is you're reaching your audience where they already are emotionally and help move them along in that respect. Hold on, I made a couple of other notes I want to, but they're all, I want to work in hard time in Ottawa, Stephen, but I haven't had a chance to figure out how to do that yet. The other thing I'll do is the regulators have all moved online as well. So I happen to know that certain MPs are doing their constituency meetings and their lobby meetings and their office meetings over, and I don't think they're actually using Zoom. I think they're using their own sanctioned tool in the government. So you can't invite, I'll say Catherine McKenna because she's my MP. You can't invite her to a meeting right now on Zoom and expect her to join you. If it's an official meeting, and you arrange something with her staff will send you an invite to use their tool, and it will be a video meeting. So everything's changing. I think, to Stephen's point and to his survey, I don't think we're ever going to go back fully to the way things were. Even when a vaccine is in place and we're all vaccinated and we're all going back to Tavern on the Hill or wherever it is, Darcy McGee's in Ottawa, to enjoy some social time, I think after a year, these new habits will be entrenched. We'll be great at Zoom, we'll be great at email, we'll be great at Facebook and Facebook Live and Twitter, and who knows what other tools are going to come along. And we're going to continue using them. We may go back to in-person meetings, but we may find out, hey, you know what? Even though I'm vaccinated and they're vaccinated, I kind of like this idea of freeing up a little bit more time in my day. And so I can stack a few video meetings and then I can go out and sit by the pool. So I don't see this changing radically. I don't see the pendulum swinging back all the way the other way. I think that everybody is now figuring out the tools. They're affordable for the most part. Offices are shutting down. I saw another interview, I think it was, interview or in overview. I was on the cover of the Ottawa Citizen today with a picture of one of the, I think it's a CEO, and he's sitting in an empty office space that has scattered chairs in it, and that's it. I think that this is, there's a great line I like to use from General George Shinseki from the States. He was one of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. He says, if you don't like change, you're going to like irrelevance a lot less. And this is not me waving the flag, rah, 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 let's all start using Zoom and email. But I think if you don't use that as part of we always talked about integrated strategies before. I think integration is now more digital and with an augment of in-person stuff rather than in-person augmented by digital. The pendulum is swinging and I don't think it's coming back.
Okay, thanks for that. I want to remind the audience that you can send in your questions on our chat line, on our question box rather, within the which is on your screen. So please send in your questions for our experts. I have a couple of questions here to start with that have come in. One is with regards to regularity, and I'll ask each of you to comment on that. What is the optimal regularity on different platforms? let's say I mean, I'll just name 2 or 3: email, Twitter, and Facebook. Steve, do you want to go first?
Sure. The different because they act differently and they're for different purposes. You can have a different frequency. And certainly on things like we used to go by a general rule of thumb: Facebook once or twice a day, Twitter 3 to 5 times a day. You can do a lot on Twitter if you want. It's no problem. Emails, I think it's a couple times a week as opposed to a couple times a day in terms of the amount of engagement. But as Mark points out, you got to have relevant content. You got to have something to say. You don't want the person getting the sense that, oh, it's just another email because they've made a commitment to send one out every day. If people are not familiar, they may be surprised to know that when an organization sends out an email blast, less than 1 in 5 is actually opened. And that's considered good. If you get more than that, that's considered pretty good. So, and so you have to be careful. And those numbers can drop. Your unsubscribe rates can drop quickly. You can start getting hit into people's spam filters if you overdo it. So you've got to make sure that you've got a good permissioned list, that your content is relevant, because certain technologies are more intrusive than others. Obviously, an email comes into a box. It's very direct. And I think in part, as I mentioned, that's why the call to actions are better, because it comes right in to you in your inbox. And there's just sort of a sense of this is a different type of communication. It's more active than passive, whereas as Facebook, although still pretty good, but Twitter, for instance, and Instagram are much more passive platforms, and therefore they can probably handle a bit more traffic. What people are looking for now, though, you know that old adage that you really need to see something 6 times before it actually sinks in. It kind of happens on social media too. And the modern technology is amazing in terms of stitching these things together. You visit a website, you see a reference on your Instagram or something like that in the sponsored ways. So you are being kind of surrounded by messaging from organizations that's happening across multiple platforms now. So that's even more interesting. But the premium now is on fine-tuning it, making sure it's relevant, identifying what people are interested in, and making sure that you're delivering information that they want to receive.
And is it different between generations? Do younger people use more Facebook than email?
Well, I think in part, yes. I mean, emails risks being, a much older tool. And we remember when only young people were on Facebook, but then when, my mother-in-law was on Facebook and my own mother was on Facebook, it began to shift, and there's constantly new technologies. So there's a proliferation of them. So the job of the person to do social media today is incredibly complex, because not only do they have to handle these different platforms, but each platform has its own culture and its own messaging approach. And so you have to if you have a core message that you want to deliver, you got to be able to shift that into multiple different ways of saying essentially the same thing to your different key audiences. So
Okay,
it's definitely a challenge.
You don't want to be copying and pasting the same message on each platform.
No, it's like there's a joke, there's a meme out there, on Instagram. Here's a picture of my donut, and on Facebook you might say, oh, I ate a donut this morning, and so there's different kinds of messages that you would say. Twitter would say, oh, I'm thinking of getting a donut. It's just they're all different ways of kind of talking about the donut, but it's different approaches based on the platform that you're on.
Mark, your thoughts on regularity?
So I agree absolutely with Stephen. I would add just a couple points. One is what I like to do is, and what I suggest people do is write a job description for the technology that you need. And don't say, oh, I need email. Write a job description of the problem you want to solve, and then find the tool that solves that problem, and then use it, with everything you can to solve that problem. in the terms of messaging or frequency and all that, I think that Stephen's right in terms of the frequency, generally speaking. It's important to note that the thing I'll often say is, how long do I have to talk? It's, well, you have as long as you need to and not a second more. So if it takes you 10 minutes to make your point, then use 10 minutes. But if it's going to take you 30 seconds, use 30 seconds and free up that other 9.5 minutes to do something else. So that's an important consideration. The only other thing I would add to that, because I don't want to repeat everything that Stephen said, is you asked the question about are more young people using Facebook. And kids still are on Facebook, but they don't use it the way they used to. They're on TikTok now. You know, my daughter's still on Snapchat, but she never talks about Snapchat anymore. She's always talking about TikTok. She's always making TikToks, if that's the right vernacular. So know your audience, not just the culture. Know who is where and what they're doing, and study what people are doing before you start to take a stab at it, because it's really embarrassing. The line we used to use is, when you join a Twitter conversation, don't just jump in with your opinions. The same way, if you went to somebody's house party, you wouldn't walk in the kitchen and go, "Hi, my name is Mark Blevis, and I just put out a book." You know, you'd listen and you'd gauge the room, and then you'd find out how to enjoy, or how to join into the conversation and contribute value.
In terms of spoken word content, if I can put it that way, Mark, podcast or YouTube?
Well, I'm a huge fan of podcasts, and I think podcasts have actually seen a pickup for a number of reasons lately. One is there's been a lot of investment into it, although a lot of that investment is moving popular content behind paywalls. The advantage of YouTube is people understand YouTube. It's very simple. You go there, you search, you get presented with options for content, and there's this big fat play button in the middle of it. And you hit play and boom. And if you don't like it, you skip or you shut down. Podcasts, and I'm a podcast purist, by the way. So when people talk about videos being podcasts or content that you go to a website to listen to, not something you can subscribe to, that's not a podcast. So in the purest sense, you need a podcasting app in order, or whether it's I'm on Apple products, so whether it's Apple Podcasts or Overcast or one of these other tools, I'm a fan of Overcast. And I subscribe and listen to a whole range of everything from marketing, communications, public affairs, political strategy, and documentary, audio doc stuff. And what I love about podcasting is I can listen to it when I take my dog for a walk, when I walk to work, when I go for, do a workout or whatever, in the car. I can't do that with video, because if I put YouTube on, I'm streaming content to my phone, video content, which is going to dry up my data plan. And the instant my phone locks, my video stops, so I can't hear it anymore. So I'm a huge proponent of podcasts, but don't write off video.
Okay, and podcasts, are people listening to, or are you listening to podcasts any less now that you're not walking to work? Are you still finding time to listen to podcasts?
Actually, it's interesting, because I did fall behind for a period of time, because when the pandemic first hit, it seemed like my workload tripled. And so I wasn't really listening. But then after a couple of weeks, when things normalized a little bit, I would put podcasts on rather than music when I was doing more mechanical tasks. The weather got good. We became less afraid to go outside. And so I let my dog run free in the park now. I wasn't able to go into the park before, so I was constantly moving. So now I can go to the park and sit by the water, and my dog can have some free time. And so, yeah, my podcast listening is definitely, I'm catching up on shows that I fell behind on.
Oh, yeah. Stephen, podcast or YouTube? What do you advise?
Well, I started in community radio before the internet, so yeah, I'm a radio guy. So I think I think it's this comparisons line up to television versus radio, video versus podcast. I think they're different. I think there's a wonderful, fantastic work going on in podcasts. It is radio. It's just in a different format, but it's the same form of storytelling, which is just amazing. And so I'm a big fan of how they work. However, there's no doubt that YouTube, the servers almost crashed when COVID began. People using YouTube too much, and as a teaching tool, YouTube is amazing. the amount of information that you can learn just about anything from YouTube. So if I was an organization trying to decide how am I going to engage my community, you need to think carefully about what is going to be the best vehicle, because they are labor intensive to do those things properly. In fact, I don't even really understand how the financial model works of some of these folks that are producing these wonderful videos and doing them, doing podcasts, and how they manage to monetize those in order to make it a viable entity. How many YouTube videos do you see that are wonderful, and you look at how many times they've been viewed? Only a few times. So a lot of organizations make the mistake of doing these wonderful videos, but they have no distribution, no promotion concept whatsoever. They just put them out there. I know they're spending, 4 or 5 figures on it, and no one's actually seeing them. So, as I say to folks, just because you can doesn't mean you should. So think about the strategy. What do you want to accomplish? And then the technology will fill that goal, as Mark was saying. Totally agree with that.
I want to throw in something else about podcasts, by the way. If you're looking for relevant podcasts, or you're looking for inspiration and guidance on how to make your own podcast, don't just listen to Revisionist History by Malcolm Gladwell. Don't just listen to Power and Politics by CBC. Don't just listen to whatever great audio doc stuff is coming out of Gimlet Media in the States or any NPR show. Those are great. And you might have the budget and the skills and the talent to do that kind of stuff. But also listen to, the strategists out of, there are 3 political strategists that have a weekly show. It went away for many years and it just recently came back. I was thrilled. That's on every week. And these are just guys who get on the phone together, they record their phone conversation, and they talk about political strategy in the current week and, what happened this past week and why did people make these decisions, what they might have done differently. Look for the amateur content, because these people are smart, they're well-spoken, not just the strategist guys, everybody. And while their audio quality might not be what Gimlet Media or CBC is putting out, the substance that they're giving you is amazing. And don't just write them off or figure there isn't anything good coming out of small organizations or medium organizations. Municipal World has a podcast. The audio quality could use an overhaul, but the discussions, even though the interviews aren't perfect, the discussions are fascinating.
Am I right with YouTube that you can't really drive people to your YouTube channel to see all your content? Because if they watch one thing, one video, at the end of it, YouTube just takes them to another random or maybe algorithm found video, as opposed to taking them back to your site, the way you would try to drive people to go to your website. So when a video is out there, people are just going to catch one and then they're gone. So you're not really getting them back. And associated with that is, what's your advice the best way to promote your videos? What platforms? All of them?
Use email. I use email to promote everything pretty much. Facebook to a degree too. But that, if I were to, someone was putting up a new video, I would say you've got to have a publicity strategy that can go from one medium to another in order to promote them. But while Andrew, you correctly point out that it's taking you off your channel and sending the viewer to someone else, the reverse can be true too, is that people can come from other channels onto yours. I've seen this, for instance, on Eventbrite, where I'm promoting events, and I know I'm picking up people because Eventbrite is feeding the information based on these algorithms, which are wonderful, by the way. I mean, Spotify, they've got it down to a science. It's just so good that they are able to curate this content and fine tune it for individuals now. But I just think in terms of call to action, which is come watch this video, is a call to action. Email and Facebook are wonderful ways to do that.
So a key thing to get the random listener is the tags you put on with each video, right? You want to have as many tags as you can, like search words that will get people to your video.
There's a lot of factors. In fact, there's whole careers that are based on these kinds of things, search engine optimization, SEO as they call it, things in order to get people to find them. But you can learn these things in terms of tags, the quality of the content, obviously how many people have seen it. The systems know if these are popular videos, they're going to serve them up to other people in order to keep them on that YouTube channel, because you hear people and just say they could just blow all day on YouTube because it's just feeding one interesting piece of content to them after another.
Yeah.
The other thing, by the way, just to build on that and the linking, is playlists on YouTube. If you link to your playlist, the video that is at the top of the playlist starts off, and then the next video that's going to play is your video. So if you learn the nuances of YouTube playlists, you can make it work for you. I just want to throw something out there. It's a little bit out of left field, but I want to reiterate something Stephen said earlier, which is don't underestimate the value of retargeting. Learn about Facebook pixels, Google pixels, all these different pixels, learn about them. It's well beyond the scope of this discussion. It'll take much longer. But if you want to make sure you drive home a message and give people a call to action even, retargeting is your friend, and it's not that expensive.
Okay, last quick question. Mark, you mentioned we're bombarded with a lot of COVID information. In terms of engaging people, is it better to be engaging on that issue of COVID, or is it time to get as far from COVID as possible if you want to engage people in your cause?
Now is a good time. Well, it's a mix. It's a mixed time. Now is a good time because people are tired of COVID. There's a lot of research that's come out that says communicators should not be putting up the "we'll get through this" messaging anymore. People now just want to go out and be in this. They want to go out to the park. They want to go out to the restaurant. They want to go to the pub. They want to get their hair cut. And so we've kind of moved past that stage of using that messaging now. So it's a good time because people want to do other things and hear about other things other than COVID. It's a bad time to reach out to politicians on unrelated issues, issues unrelated to COVID and also on systemic racism, because that's where they're occupied right now. If you try to get an appointment for whatever your advocacy cause or your institutional cause is at this moment, you're not going to get an appointment. And if you are, they're going to go, thanks for that information. We'll get to that maybe in March after there's a vaccine. They've got bigger fish to fry. So it's a good time because COVID is moving out of the way for the most part. I'm not saying the virus is going away. I'm not saying we shouldn't be concerned, but the amount of activity and the frequency at which people check these things now has, I don't know, you've probably seen this, Steve, is probably declined significantly. I know I don't check as often. I check once or twice a day now. I used to check every hour. I was ripped with fear. And while I'm still concerned, life goes on and I can go to the park now. So, I've got my mask, I've got my gloves, and I carry them with me and I use them when I need to. And I'm not interested necessarily in being bombarded with the COVID message.
Okay, and sorry, just on your point, you said politicians are obsessed with COVID or focusing a lot on COVID and racism, or racism is not on their agenda?
Oh, I think racism is on their agenda. I think, you can't duck these issues. And I'm not saying that they should be ducking them. I'm saying that these are time-consuming, all-consuming issues, and they're going to dominate the agenda and the conversation for months.
Okay, Stephen.
Can't be tone deaf.
Yeah,
that's the worst crime you can be. Is just tone deaf, not paying attention to what people are thinking, what they're hearing, and being aware of that in terms of your own delivering your own message. I know during the period of COVID, there was a time when everyone just kind of held back because there was no space to talk about anything but COVID. Other than, I think there was an equity message, an important equity message there, and it's now shifting to what people call just transition or build back better. It all means the same things about creating a new world and the opportunities that are emerging out of that. So there's room for connecting with those in the movements that I've worked with. And certainly racism has got to be key. We have to be focused on that. That's what people are consumed with. And you can't be, and I think it falls on all of us in terms of social movements, in terms of looking at their own systemic racism in their own organizations, taking account of that. We're not absent of that. We have to be aware of where the popular, or where the discourse is, and how do we fit in it.
Okay, with that, I'm sorry to cut off our discussion. We could go on and on, but this has been fascinating in terms of tying together all the issues we've been dealing with at the Pearson Center, but at people across the country are dealing with, and how we communicate that and engage with Canadians. So thanks very much, and I'll turn it back to Francesca.
Well, again, I will echo Andrew's thanks. It was absolutely a fascinating discussion on how we can stay in touch, engage, and participate in better policy development. And I have to say that on a personal level, I really learned a lot. So thank you so much to you both, and thank you very much to the audience for being with us today and for all your questions. Before we wrap up, I just want to remind the audience that we have 3 other webinars planned in the weeks ahead. So if you want to mark your calendars for July 7th, we have a conversation on the economy and the future of work with Dr. Jim Stanford of the Institute for Future Work. On July 9th, we have a webinar on the basic income with Sheila Roger of the Basic Income Network and Terence Hudsley, who's a senior fellow of the Pearson Center. And on July 14th, we have a conversation with Infrastructure Minister Catherine McKenna on infrastructure as a key element of economic recovery. So with that, thank you to everyone for being here today, and stay safe and happy Canada Day.
Thank you very much for having me. It was a pleasure to be part of it. Nice to meet you, Stephen.
Thanks, Francesca. Hey, Mark. Thanks, Andrew.
Nice to meet you both.